To get things going properly, we're going to have a welcome by Professor Peter McCluskey. Peter's the director of the SafeSide Institute, which is the flagship centre of the Faculty of Medicine and Health, located at the Sydney Eye Hospital not far away. He's a professor and chair of ophthalmology at the University of Sydney, an inflammatory eye disease specialist with more than 25 years of experience in the field that many of the people here have actually worked with and been patients of. His primary clinical focus is vision-threatening chronic inflammatory eye disease. He's a passionate teacher who's lectured and been a principal invited speaker at conferences around the world. Over to you, Peter.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much, Michael. Now, I'll see if I can make the technology work, which is always a challenge. Which is excellent. Okay. I know we've tried it a whole lot of times. Okay, fantastic. So I don't think I can top that welcome to country. I mean, I think the most important thing to take away from that wonderful thing is together we are much more strong. And I think that's really one of the themes that we've had here with our Family Day ever since it began back in 2013, as Michael said. And, you know, this has really grown since then. And one of the key things, just to echo one of Michael's messages, is feedback to make sure that we can improve on it and talk about the things that are relevant to everybody. The feedback we got, pardon me, very early on was to focus on transitions, you know, starting school, going to high school, leaving school, things like that. And that's certainly been a recurring focus over all of the family days that we've had. And, you know, we've got more than 100 people registered here for today. And we really think it's one of the most important events that our institute runs. Now, as Michael said, a lot of you have been over to see either John Grigg or myself or some of the other academics in the SafeSide Institute in the Eye Hospital. So I thought today I would just share with you some of the important milestones that have happened in eye healthcare in Australia that involve the university. So believe it or not, the first eye hospital in Australia was down in the Rocks in 1882, not quite the Rum Corps, but you know, we've been there since a very early part of Australian history. It then moved up to Macquarie Street, and the first three burnt down, but the last one was built of sandstone and is still there. And that's where we are to this day. The University Eye Department was started in 1964 by Dr. Frank Claffey, and then Eddie Donaldson became the head of the Eye Department for a number of years. And then many of you will know and remember Professor Frank Bilson, who was the Foundation Professor of Ophthalmology in 1977. And Frank, well, he still is, he's still with us, is a pediatric ophthalmologist, and he really brought together a lot of innovations. Under his sort of leadership, we started to do electrophysiology and electrodiagnostic services, one of the first in Australia, indeed one of the first in the world. And that's one of the cornerstones of the investigations that we do to sort out and figure out what's going on in inherited retinal eye disease. In 1985, again, with the Lions New South Wales and ACT Save Sight Foundation, those of you who are older will remember about every 10 years, the government decides it's time to close the eye hospital and move it somewhere. And so they cut off the funding. There's a lot of yelling and screaming. And this time in 1984 and 1985, Frank went to the Lions Foundation and they very generously gave him the seed funding that started the SafeSide Institute. And for the 50 years since then, they have supported ophthalmology and vision research. Some of you will remember that Helen Keller said to the Lions, as I love to say to our trainees last century, that the Lions needed to be knights for the blind, and that's one of their core missions. And we've worked together with them. We're all Lions. There's a Lions Club at Sydney Eye Hospital, which I see Jean-Claude down the back there, as he is every year. And he keeps yelling at us and gently making us have meetings and do what good Lions should do. But with the Lions, we that funding has enabled us to flourish and to encourage other academics to join us. The next photo along from 1989 to 1992, some of the older people in the audience will see a very young Reg Livermore being examined by Professor Paul Mitchell. Paul started the Blue Mountains Eye Study, which is one of the most successful long-term studies of what happens to people with eye disease and how common different eye diseases are in our community. It was done in Katoomba and Leura because it was a very stable population, and that's been, you know, a fantastic study that's still actually getting data. In 1995, the eye hospital moved from Woolloomooloo down opposite the Domain car park up to Macquarie Street, where it's been ever since. And oh, sorry, I've gone too far. Yeah, and so in Macquarie Street, it's continued to develop. In 1998, many of you will know we do a lot of intravitreal, intraocular injections of drugs to treat diabetes and macular degeneration. And now, of course, for genetic eye disease, Lux-Turner is given into the eye. And Mark Gillies and Alex Hunya Sr. and Frank and a number of other academics, they actually developed intravitreal therapy. They did the first injections therapeutically with steroids into the eye in 1998. Another group of our academics around the same time developed what we call multifocal VEPs, objective visual fields, and that's been very successful. Mark Gillies was one of the original members of an international collaboration that has developed a cure for a disease called macular telangiectasia. And then John Grigg, who unfortunately can't be with us today, he really started our research into inherited eye disease and genetically determined eye disease. And as you know, John has a very well-deserved high international profile along with his wife, Robin Jamieson, and they're world leaders in understanding genetically determined eye disease and developing treatments for it. Frank retired in 2009 and I took his job. Well, sorry, I didn't take his job. I was, after a clear and transparent process, I was appointed, which is exactly, as you know, what always happens in politics and universities. So this next year will be my 16th year in this position, and we've just tried to keep doing what Frank did, which is basically I've surrounded myself with really smart people and then just sat back and enjoyed the ride. And our institute has continued to grow and flourish, as you'll hear from Will today about genetically determined eye disease. Mark Gillies started a very successful program of save site registries. And in 2013, we started a thing called the Coles Colloquium because the Coles family, Ken Coles and his father, Sir Kenneth Coles, have always been involved with Sydney Hospital, Sydney Eye Hospital, with the University of Sydney. They've been very generous benefactors. And when I started, Ken Coles was the chair of the advisory board. And I think without Ken's help, I wouldn't be alive because the politics would have killed me and our institute would be very different to what it is now. And we've really done a lot of pivotal clinical trials since that time. And now, you know, the most recent, I guess, major milestone is that, as you know, Robin Jamieson and John Grigg led the team that did the first genetic therapy for eye disease in Australia back in 2020. And we've now treated, I think, 11 patients with Lux-Turner, and it really has changed the outlook for those patients. We've proven that you can actually make this work in Australia, in a community. The reason there's so many people in that photo there above 2020 is there's a team of 52 people that it takes to get a gene product out of the freezer from when it's been sent by the manufacturer to Australia and in the operating theatre ready for, you know, Matt Simonovic or Gurav to Badwadi to inject subretinally into a patient. So it's a mammoth undertaking, but it's a really critically important one. And we now have a sort of a proven team that can do this. So my last slide is last year, although we're, as I realised, probably just out by a year, we had earlier this year, a large dinner at the university called the 40, 50, 60 dinner to celebrate 40 years of the SaveSight Institute, 50 years of the Lions, New South Wales and ACT SaveSight Foundation, and 60 years of the discipline of ophthalmology at the university. And that was a fabulous event. And I think it's important that we celebrate the good things rather than focus on the bad things, which tends to happen much more these days, sadly. We've got a strong vision for the future. You know, when we go to try and raise funding from philanthropists and from industry, the sort of, as they say, the tagline that we use is that we want there to be no blind Australians by 2050. So, you know, blindness in Australia, it's not perfectly totally curable, but we can make a huge dent in it. You know, we know what the problems are, even for the commonest, in a sense, untreatable cause of vision impairment and blindness in our community, inherited eye disease. We now have cures. There's an increasing number of clinical trials. You know, the sort of the whole stage is changing, and we think it's an achievable, audacious goal, and that's what we're striving towards. So just to finish, as Michael said, you know, today will be, I think, a really interesting and fascinating day. We've got, you know, patient perspectives, exhibitor perspectives, research perspective, the opportunity to talk in small groups and plenty of time to chat to each other. And the best thing is I think we're back to face rather than doing it all by Zoom as we did in COVID. The other thing to remind you, there's only two sorts of infections these days, rat negative and rat positive. I have a rat negative infection, so it's safe for me to be here. So I will hand you back to Michael, and just to see how, I'm not sure Michael will tell us which one of his children did the welcome to country, because I can't tell from Tim.
That's her.
Yeah. So just making you feel old yet again. But I'll hand you back to Michael. Thanks very much, everyone, for coming. I hope you have a great day, and I'll be here until the closing remarks. So I'll talk to you during the day. Bye-bye for now.